Banditos, welcome to another Wednesday episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. This is the first of the month for October. On this October 5th, I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Warren Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
And we hope you all had a great weekend and your work week is just flying by. But if it isn't, don't worry. We're going to make your hump day a little bit easier with another interview with a great comic book artist and creator. Who, you might ask? Well, we're talking about none other than Jamal Igle. Jamal's career spans DC, Marvel, Image, as well as independents. And he's worked on some of our favorite characters like Superman, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, and he had a 2-year run on Firestorm.
Yeah, I was away on vacation when you guys got to chat with him, so I'm very jealous because he's also a fellow wrestling fan. I saw he did a beautiful, beautiful cover for our friend Ali Tarantino that Ali showed off on Facebook. But to have the runs that he had on these iconic characters, it's a tribute to his talents and how much he's done in the comic book world.
Yeah, Jamal's a real journeyman. He started as an intern for DC Comics and moved his way up through an animation gig, some independent work, then some big books at DC and Marvel, and then just kind of diversified. He worked with past guest Kwanza Osajyefo's Black and its sequel White, which are 2 great books. You should look those up. And also he did his own creator-owned stuff with Molly Danger, which I think would be ripe for a comeback. It was only a few years ago, but with everything going on in the kids' graphic novel sector, I think that would be a welcome return and addition. But anyway, let's go to it. This is Jamal Igle.
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask the same question we do everyone to kick it off. How did you discover comics?
That's actually, that's an interesting question for me, just because I kind of had this kind of circular sort of discovery, because I didn't really know about comics per se, but I knew about like comic book characters. So, it was one of these days where it just kind of seemed like I was always surrounded by like comics and cartoons and superhero stuff. Like my dad and my uncle Carl were both into like comics and everything. And my dad drew, but he wasn't like a comic book artist. He was sort of like this like multimedia, like abstract artist, but he liked reading comic books and everything. And then, so like, in my house when I was a kid, it was like the Adventures of Superman and, Batman 66, and then like it's the 70s, so we had like Electro Woman and Dyna Girl on Saturday mornings, and Bigfoot and Wild Boy, and then like the Shazam TV show on CBS and everything. So I was always kind of surrounded by superheroes and everything. And my mom, who also draws but isn't an artist per se, like professionally or anything, but always kind of drew. Like she would do stuff like she painted a mural. She took the John Romita newspaper header from the old Spider-Man Sunday strip and painted that as a mural on my bedroom wall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then like painted Annie for my sister on the opposite wall. So it's just like, it was just kind of always there. And then when I was 5, my grandfather took me to see Superman the movie. And that just sort of like cemented everything. So after that, it just like comic books were everywhere, but I didn't start buying my own comics until I was probably like 8 or 9 years old.
That's awesome. Do you still have any of the comics that you first collected?
Oh God, no. They are lost to the winds of time and to way too many moves. I've managed to like rebuy things that I had back then. But like there was just no way. Like I moved across country several times. There was just no way to hold on to any of that stuff,
Cool.
So I read that you had an internship at DC.
Yes.
Very early on in your career, well, before you had a career, really.
Yes.
In high school.
In high school.
Yeah. So what was that like to have that early in exposure to the industry, and what did you learn right off the bat that you didn't know or you were surprised by? Well,
okay, so the way that the internship came about is I'm in New York City. I grew up in New York City, and there's a program called City as School, and they had an executive internship program where they would take high school juniors and seniors, and they would get them internships at different companies. So I interviewed for Marvel, and then I interviewed for DC, and I went to the Marvel internship, and it was very corporate, and like the Marvel offices back then. This was when they were still at 387 Park Avenue. I mean, the Marvel offices were cool and everything, and but it was like such a huge space, and it just seemed very corporate and very like structured and laid out. And then I went to the DC interview, and the place was a mess. There was paper everywhere. People were just running around like chickens with their heads cut off, and I was just like, I'm home. Like this is where I want to be.
This is my energy.
So yeah, this is my energy. So yeah, so they offered me the internship like that day, and it was very cool. So I worked at DC as an intern for 6 months, and this was '89. So this was around the time when like they were doing Invasion, and like the whole Bwahaha Justice League was like in its prime. So I spent a lot of time in the Justice League office, just like hanging out. And that's where I met Kevin McGuire. That's where I met Mark Badger. That's where I met Mike Mignola. That's where I met Kyle Baker, and just like I was hanging out in that office and just like getting kind of like the feel for editorial, the process and everything. And then I would actually help out the editors. I would do stuff like I would cut and make readies, which were like printed comics without the covers on them, but they had to be trimmed so that you could read them because they came with the registration marks and the pages were still bound. So I had to cut those, put the covers on, and then hand them out to the editors. That was one of my duties. And then something else I would work with Bob Greenberger, who was the Star Trek editor at the time, and like opening FedEx boxes, and, checking artwork and stuff like that. And what else did I do? So a lot of it was just kind of like watching. There was the head of the color department was a guy named Bob LaRose, who, this was back in the days, this is before pre-Photoshop, so he would check all the codes for the Dr. Martens dyes because they would have to do the colors separately on photocopies back then to send to the printer, so the printers knew what colors were supposed to go where. So he had to make sure that all the codes were correct as the color guides were coming through. So stuff like that. And then, in between, they taught me how to shoot photostats, which was how they used to do all the corrections. They would shoot photostats separately, and then they would put the balloons on and the logos, and then they would take those back and shoot those to send to the printers for the covers and for pages that needed to be corrected, and all sorts of stuff. I learned how to ink with a brush there. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about production. I learned a lot about editorial. It was a great experience, especially for a 17-year-old. Like I was blown away like the entire time.
That's amazing. There are two things I wanted to follow up on. One, I find it interesting that as opposed to, I think, the older guys who came up in the 70s,
right,
who to a person would say that DC was the buttoned up operation and Marvel was the fast and loose, crazy place. Yeah. So it's really interesting to hear sort of the opposite.
Well, yeah, by the time I got to do that, I mean, we're talking 1989. So this is like right before the Batman movie came out. This is like right around that. I mean, there was so much stuff that was happening, coming out of like the Justice League office, especially because I think those were probably like the highest selling books at the time. And then they were doing Invasion, and then they were doing they were gearing up for the death of Superman and for the whole Batman. They had just introduced Tim Drake as Robin, and so there's just a ton of energy going on. There's just so much going on. But it was such a great opportunity, not just to learn, but a lot of the people that I ended up meeting while I was there were, they were very open and very giving of their time. They didn't have to be, there was an editor who was there named Mike Urey, who gave me my first copy of Watchmen. There's Andy Helfer and Kevin Dooley, who were the editors on Justice League at the time. 4 years later, Kevin Dooley was the editor on Green Lantern and gave me my first DC work. So
he's a pisser, by the way.
Yeah, Kevin's awesome. I love Kevin.
Yeah.
Kevin is great.
We had a chance to interview him, and he was like, I had one thing I wanted to do. I wanted to work for DC, and I wanted to work on Green Lantern. And I did that. I was like, well, damn. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But he was great. Andy Helfer was great. That was where I met Mike Gold and Mark Waid and Bob Greenberger and Shelley Iver. And just people who would be influential, even if they really didn't realize it at the time, on the rest of my career. I felt like that was such in terms of being comic specific, was such a formative moment for me, because it went from being it really went from being a hobby to a business to me at that point. I wanted to do comics. I don't think up until that point I was really sure if there was a place for me to do comics and if it was really a viable career path. And they showed me that it was.
That's also interesting. I think it's very positive, but there are others who have an experience where you have this fantasy of what making comics is, because you only see the finished product, and you love the art and the writing and everything, and then you get into the business. And I actually worked, listeners have heard me say this before. I actually worked in Marvel a couple of years, and this was more my experience. But I'm glad you didn't have it, which is seeing how the sausage is made. Right, sort of bursts the bubble a little bit on this sort of fantasy of what comic books are. So I am glad, because it made your career. I think that you found not only, positive role models, but a way to sort of, you're like, well, this is what I want to do. This is great. And this is what I sort of imagine.
Well, being pissed off that the sausage making part came later. Oh, believe me, I have had my fair share of BS over the years. Sure. But that initial foray into the business was nothing but positive for me.
Well, that's good. We may not be talking to you if it was brought as negative, right?
So I know, we're definitely going to come back to comics, but during your career, you had a chance you work for some smaller comic book publishers, but then you decided to work in animation.
Right.
What drove you to do that?
A lot of it was kind of twofold, actually. Some of it was predicated on being frustrated with where I was career-wise in comics at the time. Because was mostly doing a lot of smaller indie stuff, like you were saying. And it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do, especially at the time. And I had this... It was like that year, this was 99, and I called 99 my almost year, where I was almost the artist on Justice League. I was almost the artist on Green Lantern. I was almost the artist on Creature Commandos. I was almost the artist on X, Y, and Z. And it always came down to me and one other person, usually Scott Eaton. And I didn't get the job. So I was frustrated with that. And then I was having like relationship issues with this girl. I won't get into it. It's water under the bridge. But it was sort of like this combination of being frustrated with my career, being frustrated with my relationship, being frustrated with New York City, and really wanting to make a change. And while I was doing all this, I had also started writing a screenplay. So I had this image in my head that I was going to make the transition to writing, but I needed, if I was going to move out to Los Angeles to become a screenwriter, I needed a job. I needed a cushion to land on. So I was at Barnes & Noble looking through the racks, and I picked up a copy of Animation Magazine. And I was flipping through the classifieds just randomly. And I saw an ad from Sony Animation saying they were looking for storyboard artists. So I called them. They sent me a test for Starship Troopers. I did the test, faxed it back to them. And they called me back like a day later and said, "We got a job for you, but you have to be out here in 2 days. Can you do it?" So I did. So suddenly I'm in Los Angeles at Sony working on the Roughneck Starship Troopers cartoon.
Oh wow.
Less than a week later. So that's how I ended up in animation.
That's pretty cool. Now, what was that experience like for you? Just changing, you're doing a similar type of work, but it's just a totally different setting.
Well, the one thing that I don't think I had realized at the time was that there were a lot of ex-comic book people working in animation. A lot of ex-comic book people. And when I got out there, and I think I had a little bit of an advantage over if you were just a straight comic book artist who was just making the transition to animation, because I had worked in advertising previously and had done storyboards previously. I already had that background. But I think the biggest difference for me is because we were working in CGI, I did not have to draw things on model. So my job was basically to be a journeyman. So all I had to do was basically lay out the story, and then we would, once the timing was done, we would send it to the finishers. They would make sure the characters were on model before it had to go to animatics. Mm-hmm. So I'm just blowing this stuff out. In comparison to animation, I am super fast. Especially if I don't have to do things on model. I was, I think we had to do a minimum of 5 pages of boards per day. I was doing 10 to 15.
That's the act. When you say pages of boards, that you're talking about the panels that they would.
No. The board,
the actual board with the
the board. Well, the boards were 8.5 by 11. Okay. But the way that they were working at the time was we were basically working on Post-it notes and taping them into these pre-done squares on the board. so they could be swapped out, and you're basically doing the editing for the episode as you're doing the boards. So I was working with a director named Adu Padden, who worked on Tiny Toon Adventures, worked on a bunch of stuff, like, you know, a legend in the animation business. And he was our director on the show. So we'd do the boards, and we'd go into his office, and he would sit there and do the timing with the voice track, you know, on the boards. He'd just pull stuff out, move stuff around, you know, say, put an arrow here, add this here, I need you to do this here, give it back. I'd go back to my cubicle, start working again, give it back to him. And then once everything was done, he would just take a big roll of Scotch tape and just start taping everything down. And that was the final that went to the finishers, and then it was out of our hands.
And how many squares per board?
It's like six, yeah. So
That's pretty
that's
cool.
a pretty big output.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen. So I had in one of my early jobs out of college, I worked at a CGI studio up here, and I would always just see the storyboard artists. Just, I don't know, man. They're just kind of crazy. Just like, just frantically like, and just literally like, you know, they had the pre-cut pages,
right.
you know, and with already the lines on them, and it was literally just a guy hunched over at the table and literally just, you know, as he's done, just whipping them out.
Oh yeah,
and,
that's
you know,
pretty
one
much,
of the PAs are just grabbing them and putting them up on the board.
That was pretty much my experience. It's actually really funny because, you know, just as I had just gotten hired by Sony, Eric Canetti had just left. So I was actually sitting at Eric Canetti's desk at Sony when I was working there.
Wow, that's cool. Very cool. Any interest at that point to maybe go into other? I'm sorry, Mike. I know this was. I just had one follow up. To work at any of the other animation studios, because this was like right before, you know, they really kind of took off. You know, before Pixar was Pixar, and you know, and
I did, but what ended up happening was the bottom fell out of domestic TV animation. So, like, for example, at Sony, everything got canceled except for Harold and the Purple Crayon. So Godzilla got canceled. Men in Black had just finished its last season. Max Steel was on its last season. And Starship Troopers had just gotten canceled. So there was no work for anybody. And I had actually left right before to work at Marvel. And by the time, like, the work at Marvel was starting to dry up again, I'd actually tested for Justice League. But everybody that was working at all these other studios that got fired from those studios all went back to Warner Brothers, who had worked on like Superman and Batman previously. So I was out of a job. I had a job, and then I didn't have a job suddenly, like within like the space of a week. So I was just like, I don't think animation's for me. You know, it's, you know, boys action, especially at the time, like they were bringing a lot of stuff in from Japan. So a lot of it was like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And, you know, was Shaman King and stuff like that. So that was all getting dubbed and, you know, distributed by 4Kids and, you know, that sort of thing. So that was sort of like the end of my foray in animation. So, you know, I ended up, you know, I was at Marvel for about 9 months, but I was still living in Los Angeles, and then moved back to New York eventually, and, you know, ended up, you know, working in comics again full time.
I wanted to quickly sort of delve into that transition back to Marvel, because so you had a good gig.
Yeah.
So at that point, you didn't know that the bottom was going to drop,
right?
In animation. Were you still like keeping a foot or a toe in the comics world? Were you sending out samples, or did they just kind of reach out to you, being like,
"No,
hey, you know who'd be good for New Warriors? It's Jamal."
No, what had happened was Greg Schiegel, who's a comic book artist, and he does this. He's got a bunch of seasons. He's doing this kids comic right now called Zootopia Universe, like superhero universe. And it's like, you know, funny animal superheroes, but he also did a series called Pix. You know, he's done a bunch of. He used to be the artist on the SpongeBob Nickelodeon comic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was an assistant editor at Marvel, and he had seen some Nightwing samples that I had done, that I had left at the Marvel booth, and had held on to them. So when they were looking for an artist for New Warriors, Greg pulled my samples out and gave them to Bobby Chase. So I'm at Sony. And my buddy Bob, who was my art rep at the time, calls me up and he's like, and I'm like, hey Bob, what's going on? He's like, well, Marvel's looking for an artist for New Warriors. I was like, okay. And I, you know, at that point I never had like a regular monthly gig. So I'm a comic book guy. The opportunity to do something monthly for Marvel, like I felt like it would have been like the worst possible move to turn it down, just for personal reasons, like not knowing that like everything was going to kind of S the bed over at Sony a couple of months later, because they had really like. They had it in their minds that I was going to be there for a while. Because I had apparently impressed one of the producers enough to want me to like move shows. So.
But it seemed to be a lucky coincidence.
Yeah. Because
had you stayed.
Had I stayed, I would have gotten laid off. So.
Right.
I wanted to jump to some specific work that you did that I'm a huge fan of, and that is Green Lantern. So I am, if you could see, other than Superman, I'm a huge Green Lantern fan.
I can see.
And you were there, correct me if I'm wrong, or you worked on Green Lantern when Jeff Johns was kind of doing his thing.
Yeah, towards the tail end, yeah.
And first off, let me just say, I loved your work on Green Lantern.
Thank you.
I thought it was, I loved everything about that period of Green Lantern. The artwork, the stories. And I wanted to know from an artist point of view, because there were certainly a few artists on different titles, so the artwork would change periodically. Yours, I thought, was I loved this style because I found it to be very clean. It had a very sleek look to it, which I really appreciated. Contrasted to some of like the other like artist on Green Lantern Corps that was a little bit rough around the edges. Right. And I'm not knocking it in any way, but it's just not my cup of tea. What was that experience like for you as an artist? Because it seemed like that period of Green Lantern really was like it was just, they're banging on all cylinders. It was great, and I was quite literally upset when the Jeff Johns run was over, and not that it hasn't been good since. Right. It had its peaks and valleys, I think, since, but it was just fantastic. They could do no wrong in my eye. What was the feeling, internally, as an artist, working with the team, working with Jeff Johns, and were you just on cloud nine, or what was it like for you?
Well, I like to joke sometimes that I'm the longest running Green Lantern artist in DC, because my first gig was with Kyle Rayner with Green Lantern number 52 back in 1994. And I worked on Green Lantern off and on right up until 2010, 10, give or take, to 8 or 10, something like that. So, I mean, it's like, because I know I did a little bit of Green Lantern stuff while, like, during Supergirl, like when I was working on Supergirl, but like and it was cool because I was working with Pete Tomasi, who was the editor on the books, and then I was working with Eddie Berganza. It's a totally different vibe in terms of editorial structure. But like Green Lantern, it's one of like my favorite concepts at DC. Like as a concept. So I always loved the opportunity to work on Green Lantern, and like Kyle and Kilowog and Guy are my 3 favorite Green Lanterns of all time. Like those are my, you know, Kyle especially. Like I had such an affinity for Kyle, and I think like, you know, I got to do like a Secret File story with him and Jade, and where I got to draw like a giant like Shogun Warrior-esque you know, droid in like Times Square, and, you know, stuff like, you know, stuff like that. Like it's just like it's cool. Like that whole period, like that whole like Sinestro Corps War period of Green Lantern, like there was so much energy around that stuff, right? There was so, like, everybody wanted to be involved somehow, and there was so much cool that was going to happen. Stuff that got canceled, like Keith Champagne and I were supposed to do a 6-issue miniseries that got like killed at the last minute. Based around the 3 issues that he did, the core. I don't know if or the corpse.
Yeah.
So they were going to do a Green Lantern the Corpse miniseries, but then when they decided that Green Lanterns were going to be able to kill in Sinestro Corps War, like the whole idea of a Black Ops Green Lantern team with the ability to kill, you know, seemed kind of redundant, so they decided not to do it. I ended up drawing the first 5 pages of the first issue anyway, but you know, and that's how it is. That's how it is sometimes. But you know, I mean, some of the, you know, one of the fun things about working on Green Lantern over the years is just I had the opportunity to experiment stylistically. You know, I had the opportunity to do some really, really cool stuff, and I got the opportunity to, like, you know, the issue Green Lantern Corps that I did where Jerry Ordway inked me is like one of the highlights of my career. Like I'm such a huge Ordway fan, and I still have one page from that story that I will never sell, I will never give away. It's the splash of Saddam Yat receiving his ring.
Yeah.
I have that page.
That's cool. I'm curious to know, how much leeway do you get to, as an artist, to tweak aspects of the character? Like, for instance, when you know, there've been certain instances or versions of, let's say, like, you know, in this case, Green Lantern, where you know, little things get tweaked on the outfit,
right?
Like when Hal Jordan came back, he didn't have like the dopey, you know, kind of the green onesie over top. It all kind of blends in, you know. It's a top. And I'm really describing this poorly.
No, I know what you're talking about.
And then the logo became more of like a shield. You know, it was kind of raised up.
Right.
And then that look has kind of gone away, I think.
Yeah.
But you know, things like that change here and there, I guess. How much you know, freedom do you have as an artist to really kind of do stuff like that?
I think it really depends. I mean, everything really comes down to editorial. You know, if the editors are cool with it, then that's fine. I think, like, you know, I think it was Ivan Reyes who did the Reyes field. You know, again, you know, it's one of those things where if you draw it and the editors don't say anything about it, then it's fine, you know. But everybody, you know, I mean, you guys know this as well. It's just that everybody has their things, that they bring to the table artistically, their predilections, their preferences,
Right.
So you can, little things like that, like the ratio, I don't think anybody really was too bugged by. You don't want to do like wholesale changes to things without permission. You can sneak stuff in occasionally, but especially if I'm working on a corporate character, I try to stay on model as possible while bringing my own sensibility to the project, but stick to the recognizable form.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know if there was like the style guide police behind the scenes, like no, not
sometimes when I was on Nightwing, I wanted to make a couple of small tweaks to the suit, and they were just like, no, you can't do it. So
yeah, I always found that interesting because you don't see that. At least I don't so much with Superman or merely Batman,
right?
Unless he's getting a new outfit. Then it's like a whole thing. Like
Batman
has a new costume. Like he gets one every month, but
yeah, exactly.
Like Superman's still wearing the same underwear on the outside. So
yeah, exactly. But Batman's like Malibu Stacy. Every once in a while, he gets a new hat.
Right. And he still has them all, and they all count. They're all in continuity in his basement.
But I think there's a little bit more leeway with a character like Batman because of that.
Yeah.
Because you could say, he's just got it in a hermetically sealed in a tube for just such an emergency.
Yeah.
He's got Bruce Wayne is a clothes whore. He really is.
That's all functional. That line that's there. Oh, there's a reason because he can pull out the thing and
exactly.
the guy.
Yeah, the pouches and the capsules on the belt, they're actually vacuum sealed other costumes.
You just pull it out.
People don't know that.
Thank you, Barry Allen.
Exactly. Right. You got that tech from Barry. I wanted to zoom out again, and then we will actually get back into some other characters. But you've had quite a mix of mainstream big two books and experiences, and then lots of indie stuff still, including like Race Against Time, Army of Angels, Molly Danger, all kinds of other stuff we'll get into later. Is that intentional, and do you like one mode over the other? Or do you really like to just kind of mix it up all the time?
It's mostly intentional, to be honest. I mean, here's the thing. About 10 years ago now, I made a decision that I was just going to have fun. And I was going to pick things that I could have fun with. I was going to pick projects that interested me, seemed weird enough to get my attention. And that's basically the way that I have been operating for like the last decade. So whether it's like, doing like a story about Alexander Dumas for Milestones in History, or doing Molly Danger, or doing The Wrong Earth, or doing Black, or doing Dudley Datsun, whatever whatever the hook is that gets me to say, okay, that sounds like it could be cool. That's usually where I gravitate towards.
And be that something that's new and different or creator owned.
Yes, absolutely.
Or even do you still get
oh yeah,
the thrill of doing work for companies that have pre-established characters?
It can, I mean, it's still fun. It's different. There's a different investment for me, as opposed to doing one of my creator owned projects. Obviously, I still get that thrill of working on other people's characters, but at the same time, like I have been so blessed over the course of my career to work with so many like legendary creators and have so many great opportunities. And now I just get to do mostly what I want to do, or stuff that's just weird enough, to keep my interest. And and I'm able to make a living doing it. And I think that's probably like the dream for most people. I'd like to think that that's the dream for most people. It's just, be able to like have fun and make money, doing stuff that, that doesn't suck, that doesn't feel like, just going through the motions. I don't ever want to be in a position, and I've been in that position in the past. I don't ever want to be in a position again where I'm just going through the motions on things.
Yep.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. So you worked on two characters that we absolutely adore. One you mentioned, Nightwing. Mm-hmm. The other is Firestorm.
Oh yeah.
What did you like about these characters that made you gravitate to them?
Well, I mean, Nightwing's my favorite member of the Bat family, and it always has been. So, that was one of those books that I just absolutely needed to do. Firestorm, I was actually a big fan of the original Firestorm run. I had all the issues. I think I still have them somewhere in a box. And when the opportunity to do Firestorm originally came up, I was actually working on a French graphic album series. I was working on Army of Angels for the Humanoids Associés. And when I was approached initially by Pete Tomasi, I said no. I turned it down, and I thought that was the end of it. And he called me back the next day. He had actually initially called me back. He had initially called me because he had 2 issues that he needed to have done, and I couldn't do it because I was not only was I working on L'Homme des Anges, but I was also doing a fill-in on Marvel Age Spider-Man at the same time for Marvel. So I was just over committed. And he offered me 2 issues, and I said no. And then he called me back the next day and he said, okay, I'm going to try one more time. Do you want to take over the series? And I said no. And I hung up the phone. I got 2 when I could hang it, because I had a wall-mounted phone, kids.
What's that?
Yes,
phone was on the wall.
The phone was on the wall. I had a wall-mounted phone. I walked away from the phone and I said, "Oh my God, what am I doing?" So I called them back and I took the job. I just said I gotta shuffle some things around, but I'm in. I'm in. So that's how I got on Firestorm. So nobody had told me about the controversies. Nobody had told me about. I didn't know anything about Identity Crisis. I wasn't reading it at the time. Didn't know anything that was going on. They didn't tell us what had happened to Roddy. I didn't know. I don't think Dan Jolly knew until the 11th hour. And so just as I'm coming on the book, it all just, the whole thing hits the fan.
Here's this character that you know and love for years. Oh, by the way, the 2 characters that were really a big part of it, yeah, they're no longer. Go ahead, go.
Well, that didn't bother me. I mean, I knew, I had been because Dan, who I had known, had contacted me before the series started to see if I might be interested. He couldn't tell me what it was at the time, and I was like, it's fun. He's calling me on the phone, and he's telling me, he's like, well, I got this thing at DC. I can't really say what it is, and I'm having a phone. I was like, it's Firestorm, isn't it? It was like, yeah, but I can't tell you that. It's like, I can't do it. I'm busy. So, so I knew about Jason Rush. I knew there was going to be. I mean, at that point, it was all over Comic Shop News and was CBR even a thing back then? I think CBR was like just the internet sites were just getting started. So yeah, so I knew that who Jason was. I knew that nobody knew where Ronnie was. I knew, the whole thing, him hijacking other people's bodies. Like they were really trying to do like this whole like kind of DCU body horror thing with Firestorm, which I thought was actually really cool, but it turned a lot of people off initially. So
I liked it.
I liked it too. But and then by the time I get on the book, if everybody finds out Roddy's been run through with the Shining Knight's sword by Shadow Thief, and he blew up and went into Jason, and that set a lot of people off.
I still remember that. It's one of it wasn't for that type of character in his demise. It wasn't a major, like I thought it should have been more of a thing.
I think that was a lot of people's complaints, was that it just felt kind of unceremonious.
Yeah, it was only a few panels. It was like, okay, flows up, and
exactly.
That was it. And I'm like,
exactly. In retrospect, I understand why they did it that way, but it really just kind of feels like an afterthought.
Yeah.
We gotta explain, why Roddy's not around. We'll stick in, a couple panels here. That's the least of Identity Crisis's problems, but
it's a very heroic moment, I thought.
Yeah.
I was like, well, okay.
But I think we really went out of our way to try to give Ronnie a nice heroic send-off, a much more heroic send-off towards the end of the first 13 issues. And then, when Stuart Moore came on the book, like we were off to the races. Like, everything just really started clicking. Not that, I didn't like working with Dan Jolly. I loved working with Dan Jolly, but it was just Stuart brought a much different energy to the series, and a lot of it was really very much based in science, and which was very, very cool. And like Stuart asked me when he first got on the book, he asked me what do I like to draw, and I basically tell all the writers that I work with, challenge me, make me draw things that I would not think of, and he did, and it's one of my favorite experiences.
Very cool.
Well, now if it's one of your favorite experiences, I feel bad going to something else, and I wonder if we're gonna. This is no. I think it should be good because you spent a lot of time there, just like you did on Firestorm, which was Supergirl.
Well, okay, yeah.
So I hope we're at least at a plateau, if not we are coming down off the mountain here.
No, we absolutely are. We absolutely are. Supergirl. I will preface this by saying Supergirl was the book that I did not know I wanted to draw. Okay. And it ended up being one of my all-time favorite experiences.
All right, let's fill in that gap then.
Okay.
How did it come to you? What was your initial reaction? And then, how did it then transform into this amazing experience?
Okay, so at the time I was working on Tangent Superman's Reign. And I was about 5 issues into working on Tangent. It was a fun gig. It was short because there were, my section was only 17 pages. And when I originally came on, I think they only wanted me to do 1 or 2 issues. And I was just like, well, if they're only 17 pages, I might as well just do the whole series. So they're like, okay. So I'm 5 issues into it. And I'm at Graham Cracker's Comics in Chicago, and I'm doing a signing there, and I get a call from my editor, Matt Idelson, and he says, so I need an artist for Supergirl. Do you want to do it? And I was just like, I don't know. Don't you think people be mad that I'm leaving Tangent Superman's reign? And he's like, do you want to stay on Tangent Superman's reign, or would you rather draw Supergirl? So it's like, okay, I kind of see your point. So who's the writer? He's like, well, we got this new guy. His name is Sterling Gates. Like, that can't be his real name. That cannot be his real name. And it is his real, legitimate, legal name, Sterling Gates. And I was just like, and I had actually met Sterling very briefly at New York Comic Con, I think like a year before. And he had just did like a fill-in on Green Lantern. And I was just like, okay, well, send me the script. Let me see what he's got, because working with a new writer can be hit or miss. And at the time, Sterling was working as Jeff Johns' assistant. So I will admit to having sort of like a preconceived notion of of somebody's assistant coming on and getting a writing gig on a book that DC seemed to have been putting a pretty high priority on at the time. And the script that they sent me was the script for Supergirl 34. And I absolutely loved it. I showed it to my wife. I was like, you have to read this. This is really good. And I talked, it's like I agreed to do the book, and I talked to Sterling, and we just clicked on so many different levels, and we basically were coming at it from the same place about what we wanted to do with Kara as a character and her world. And it never felt like work. I always looked forward to seeing what came next and what we were going to do next, what we were trying to do next. And it was really like, it was cool and weird at the same time, because this was like right in the middle of the whole like world of Superman storyline, and it was like really my first time having to work on like what felt like a constant crossover between all of these books, where you're getting scripts for your book, but you're not seeing the pages from the book that leads into yours, so things don't always line up visually, but you're doing what you can to make it work. And it was just a great experience. It was a great experience. They trusted me to experiment and to try new things. And I look back on how much, for me, like how much visual growth there is for me between issue 34 and issue 40, for example, where just things really started to coalesce. I started to figure out what I wanted. I wanted Kara to look like. I wanted her world to look like. I wanted the characters who inhabited her world to look like. And it was I treasure it. There's never going to be a moment in my life where I will not look back on Supergirl as being nothing but one of the best working experiences I ever had. Just because it it was cool. It was, you know, the you know, I mean, you know, I joke that, you know, Supergirl's shorts are going to be on my tombstone, but but at the same time, like that felt like a minor thing that I did not realize would be important to a lot of people, particularly like women fans. Like that became a very important thing for them, and it made me realize that people connect on little things like that with characters. Like they like to know that you care about, you know, what you're doing and how you're presenting the work and how you're presenting their favorite character.
It shows, you know, from a fan's point of view. It shows, and it, you know, like, and if you're reading the content, you can feel it when you read it, and it, you know, I can definitely tell you as a fan, you can see when someone loves what they do, and you could see when someone is clearly phoning it in, and they're getting paid a whole lot of money to do so.
Yeah.
And you're like, huh, really? All this fanfare for this?
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
That's okay. No, I'm the same way. You
I'm
know,
not going to name names.
No, I'm. You know what? I'm just as much a fan as anybody else. I'm reading comics every week. I'm trying to keep up with what's going on in the industry. You know, I've got my favorites. I can tell when people just don't give a crap, and it hurts. You know, especially if it's on something that you love. If it's on a character that you love or a run that you love. You know, you want. I'm a snob. You know, I need that marriage of writing and art to be able to come together. You know, if one doesn't support the other, it's painful. It's like physically painful to me to read as a fan.
Mm-hmm.
And you want it to be like that all the time.
Oh yeah.
And unfortunately, it's not. It feel. You know, I'm not one to use a lot of sports metaphors, but there are times when there are rebuilding years.
Yes, exactly.
Rebuilding issues.
Unless it's Super Pro, then we're all about it.
Right. Super Pro was just, you know, perfection from beginning to end. Yeah. So there are times, right, when you know the footing is off.
Yeah.
And it's disappointing. But then usually the bloom is back on the rose in no time, and you have a new, different marriage of art and
when a book is hitting on all cylinders, there's nothing better. There's absolutely nothing better. When you know that the creative team is giving 100% in everything, how can you beat that? Like, honestly, from a fan standpoint, even from a professional standpoint, I love seeing, you know, the work that other people produce, and I love seeing them put like the full court press into a project.
Yeah.
Just to, I know we're a little past our usual time, but I had one other question for you before Mike goes, and it just really more about your experience. And you mentioned you've done a fair amount of work outside of the U.S. for other publishers,
right?
And what is that experience like for you? And is it differ process-wise compared to working for publishers here in the U.S.? Like, do you have more or less creative freedom, or how does that differ for you?
It really depends. And again, it depends on the project. Like, you know, working for Humanoids was, especially at the time, was challenging because they were very much micromanagers. Like everything was being scrutinized in a way that would not be scrutinized in American comics, just based on the scheduling. and how bande dessinée is produced as opposed to how American comics are produced. I did this. I did this issue of this book called Perry Rodin, which is based off this German sci-fi series, and I actually had to work from another Carl Alstetter's layouts, but the book was so late that I had to do like 20 pages in 8 days of pencils, and it was just like,
Oh, wow.
they didn't care. They just needed to get it out and on the stands because it was way behind schedule by the time it got to me. So again, it really depends on the publishers. Like some publishers are really cool. I mean, even within the U.S. I mean, it depends on the venue. Like when I did the Mysterious Microface for NPR, it was, I was trying to take as much time as I could realistically take to do the best job that I could with that project, even though like by the time it got to me, the previous artist had to quit because they had doubled the page count of the issue. It was originally supposed to be 24 pages and ended up clocking out about 39. So that, adds time, that adds a lot of like logistical things and trying to figure out scheduling. But, I was still able to do like a page a day, like a page every 2 days, depending on how much detail was required. And I was doing it digitally, so which helped the process as well. But, it all really depends. It changes from venue to venue, from publisher to publisher. Some publishers are much more lax. Ahoy is one of those publishers where we have a much more lenient production schedule. And kind of the same thing with Comixology. Like comics, the schedule is a little bit more lenient based on the creators. But I'm one of these people who I try to make sure that I'm on point. I'm moving things along, so that other people can get paid.
Got it.
To Joe's point, I know we're going a little long here, so stop us at any point. But I would not be doing my job if I didn't ask about two more recent, not super recent indie projects. One is Molly Danger, and the other is Black.
Yes.
So as far as Molly Danger goes, I'd love to know, how that project came about. If it was a long gestating idea that finally found execution through Kickstarter, or if it was something that sort of came out of what you were working on and just you needed to get it out there.
Well, I originally came up with the idea for Molly Danger in 2003 and did the Kickstarter in 2011. So it was very much a long gestating project. Molly Danger actually started life as a animation pitch.
Oh.
And at the time, you had shows like the Life and Times of Juniper Lee and Atomic Betty and Kim Possible and the Powerpuff Girls, and me and a buddy of mine were trying to figure out like if we were going to do an animated cartoon, what would we want to do? So the name came first. The name Molly Danger came first, and initially Molly was going to be older, but then I decided, what? No, she's 10. She's 10 years old. And the original idea for Molly was that Molly, it was going to be more of like an Alice in Wonderland sort of through the looking glass kind of thing, where you didn't know if she was a little girl imagining being Molly Danger, or she was Molly Danger and transforming back into this little girl, into this normal little girl. And I put it on the side because I just kept getting busier and busier with other stuff. And then when my contract ended at DC and I decided I wanted to start freelancing again, that's when the idea for Molly sort of came back. because I had been approached by another friend of mine who wanted to do a Kickstarter. He wanted to come up with an idea for Kickstarter. I hadn't heard of Kickstarter at the time. And I went and looked at the website and I said, wait, I could do this. I could, I've got advertising experience. I can run a social media campaign. I do PR. So I was trying to figure out what I could do, and then Molly just kind of popped back in my head. So I went and looked at all the old sketches and everything, and all the outline, and I was just, and I looked at it. I was like, this is way too complicated. This is way more complicated than it needs to be. And I think a lot of that really came from having the opportunity for so many years to work with Sterling, and to work with like Greg Rucka and Grant Morrison and Mark Waid, like opportunity to look at all of these, James Robinson, and looking at all these scripts and having like years and years of like writing by osmosis kind of seep into my brain. So I basically said to myself, this is the idea. She's Molly Danger. She's always been Molly Danger, and the only thing she knows about herself is that she's Molly Danger. And that was where I built the idea from. So.
Interesting. That's sort of like a 180 from your initial concept, where you don't know whether she's Molly Danger or not.
Exactly. Well, I figured that as a starting point. So for the listeners who don't know, and the viewers who don't know, Molly Danger is a 10-year-old superhero who's been 10 years old for 2 decades. So the idea really kind of became, you have this superpowered 10-year-old with 20 years of combat experience, whose entire life is basically on display. She lives in a museum. The entire city that she protects has rebuilt itself around Molly Danger tourism. So, she's a bird in a gilded cage, but she doesn't age. She doesn't get older. She doesn't get any more mature. She's sort of stuck as this 10-year-old. So she's looking for a friend in a world that tells her that she can't have friends. So that was the idea.
It's a very cool concept.
That is.
And a great book.
Thank you.
I wanted to end on Black.
Yes.
It is written and conceived, or co-written and co-conceived by a friend of mine from Marvel. It's Kwanza.
Yeah.
And his partner, Tim Smith. And they, obviously, I think this was a long gestating idea in his head.
Yeah.
How were you approached for the project, and what were your thoughts when it was pitched to you?
Okay, so I met Kwanza when he was an editor at DC. So he was editing Smallville season 11, and I did an issue of that, and then he had left DC, and we kind of traveled in the same circles with the new people in common. So. And I knew Tim from like the New York con circuit, like see him at shows and everything. So Kwanza calls me and he says, "I've got this idea that I want to pitch to you. Can we come over to your place and show it to you?" So I was like, "Yeah, sure." So Kwanza comes out to my place in Brooklyn. Tim lives near me, but he was running late. So Kwanza comes over and he takes out his phone and he shows me this graphic with a kid in a hoodie, and all it says above him, and it's against a red background, and in big black letters it says, "What if only black people had superpowers?" I was like, "Oh, you gotta be kidding me! Oh my god!" It's like, okay, I have to be a part of this. This is like this. Again, this goes back to what I was saying before, like the stuff that I find interesting, the things that I would not necessarily have thought of myself. But that was one of the things where it's just like, there's a light, like the light bulb is like, God damn it! Why didn't I think of that? So that's how I got involved. And like we were literally sitting in my living room, like trying to figure out when to launch the Kickstarter campaign and when to do all the like the interviews and like how to line it up, because we were originally going to try and launch it, I think October, in time for that year's New York Comic Con, and I said no. February, Black History Month. That's when we launch, and it worked.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, worked really.
It worked. It worked really, really well.
Yeah, spin-offs. You got hopefully a movie in the works.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I've been sort of watching from the sidelines, being very jealous and excited for you guys. Did the level of the book and the story sort of live up to that initial, spark that you had? That's like, well, the concept is just rock solid and amazing.
It did, but it expanded, because originally it was supposed to be a manga-sized digest.
Yeah.
And then because the Kickstarter campaign went so well, it became a full-blown, like, 6-issue comic book series. So all the artwork became bigger and more detailed and took more time, and we had to bring in a separate inker and somebody else to do the tones, and it became a much more massive project than it began as, in a good way. And then of course we ended up doing White as well. And so that those 2 volumes are out, and I know that Kwanza wants to do the 3rd. I don't know when we'll get to it. At some point, we'll get to it. I don't know. We'll see. I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will happen. It's just we are all busy people.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We are back. Such a cool guy and a great interview. Something I really appreciate about this show is, meeting such interesting and creative people, but we're also connecting the comic book career dots, by which I mean, we've had a chance to talk to Kwanza, one of the fellow creators of Black. And now we've had a chance to talk to Jamal about, his work in Black as well. And it's great because you get to hear, everyone's point of view and their side of the story as it pertains to these projects. I find that really interesting, and it's Jamal himself is just a really interesting guy to talk to. Great stories and a great journey to where he is today.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed this one. You guys did an absolutely bang up job, as usual, to be expected. Certainly someone I'd love to speak to myself, but just to hear some more about what he's done and how he got to the points he's gotten to, and to talk a little wrestling too.
Yeah, I enjoyed this one. I have nothing much to add. I mean, Jamal was a fantastic interviewee. I really enjoyed talking to him. Interesting stuff. Fun guy. And love to have him back on, and Oren can talk to him about wrestling, which I don't know about. So, I hope you enjoyed the interview. Thank you for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, and we will see you next time.